Government of Madhya Pradesh.
We've seen changes in the world around us, large parts of the world. Developing economies, low-income economies, developed economies are facing the crisis of the changes that we are seeing, whether it's floods, wildfire, the impact on agriculture, the impact on food, energy. All of that is front and center for us to take cognizance of today. The question, though, is there enough will at this point in time, political, business will? Is there enough financing? Is there access to technology? Can we ensure that access to technology is going to be equitable? Who is going to fund all of this? Those are some of the questions that we are going to be addressing here. Feike, let me get started with you. We're very clear that we need to move in parallel as far as adaptation and mitigation is concerned, and that has to be the way forward. How far have we moved on that front? How far have we moved on realizing that adaptation requires intervention? It requires urgent intervention.
Yes, thank you, and thanks for organizing this panel. I'm glad that adaptation gets more and more attention, but we are not yet there at all. People found it difficult to understand what is now all these climate actions, climate mitigation, adaptation, what is all, loss and damage, etc.
Break it down for everybody who's watching.
Mitigation is trying to prevent that we come above 1.5 degrees, so decreasing emissions. Although we know we will not manage that. We need to continue with mitigation, but we will not manage it. Already today, for Africa, for Indonesia, for India, climate change is a reality, not to grow enough food to eat. So it's nothing for the future, something today. So therefore, next to mitigation, we need to work on adaptation, making our food systems more resilient, that we can grow food. Also, when it is flooding or droughts, then we have different water systems, infrastructure cities. That is adaptation. Then we have a third one added to that recently in Egypt. That's loss and damage, where we admitted that there is a root cause by some and there is some suffering. So that's more a financing thing. Still need to be filled in. On the adaptation, it is not enough money which is allocated now. Only 20% of what is needed is now being available. And that 20% does not find its way with business. Only 1% of the global adaptation budget is spent by business. Business is almost absent in the total adaptation thing. So adaptation needs to be much higher on the agenda. And we need to be able to involve the private sector also to come with new seeds that can grow when there's not enough water, with new water systems, with new way to protect cities for floodings, with new way to protect infrastructure, etc. And the technologies are there, but we have still to orchestrate it. And we need to make clear what it is. And one last thing, on mitigation, we have a clear goal. We need to keep the world below 1.5 degrees. Okay. On adaptation, we need to become more resilient, whatever that is. We don't have a clear, common, well-defined single goal, and that makes it more complicated.
Bob Moritz, let me address this issue with you. As Feike pointed out, and you were talking to me about this as well just before we started, that if there were 80 CEOs in Davos who were talking about climate change and the need for intervention, the need for collaboration, why is Feike saying that there is no will at this point in time? There is no access to finance. We don't know who to go to, where to go to, and how to put those two together. Why this deficit?
So as Feike described, we have a great conversation, and I want to be clear, the CEOs have been having conversations on the topic of mitigation, and they have been taking action on that. I want to be super clear. What we have done is done it in lieu of, and unfortunately at the expense of, adaptation. So the WEF, and appropriately so, commissioned a report that actually would do the course correction to bring the business community, to bring equal prominence to the business narrative, the government narrative, and the societal narrative of why this is important. And in order to do that, what's it going to take to get the business community to step up to the challenge, not to at the expense of mitigation, but rather get equal amount of time, attention, capital, and action on the issue of adaptation. The report specifically talks about how do we enhance this in terms of the business resiliency that businesses have to deal with. How do we actually turn a negative into a positive in terms of the upside potential? I'll come back to that point in a second. And third, how do we bring together collaborative examples where it has helped business, but also society, local communities? And that's usually important. I want to come back to that point. So the report itself did a study of 100 companies, and to Feike's point, this issue is here now. Of the 100 companies, 70 of them already have gone through catalytic issues that have actually impacted, because of the physical issues, the physical risk issues, an event happened that has never happened before, and it is happening more and more times. And the reality is, in one given year, it's 10% of the revenue. Go to the other side of the equation. If, in fact, these organizations did the things we're asking them to do in terms of the innovative techniques, leveraging technologies, which we'll talk about in a second, there is upside potential. That upside potential comes in the form of revenue, brand, stakeholder capitalism coming through, and the avoidance of cost, therefore the avoidance of investment. That investment can go to other places to actually achieve the SDGs. Whatever we do on adaptation, we cannot reduce the mitigation efforts that Feike talked about. Point number one. Point number two, adaptation does not mean walking away from a city that may have potential flooding or drought risk. It means working with the city, working with the government to make sure that we stay for societal benefit, for societal reasons, and we have the economic development happening. And that's where capital has to come in the big time way. So the CEOs in that deficit, this is now the pivot. The report was helping accelerate that pivot. And that's what we're looking to see over the next year or two.
Excellent. I'll get to the issue of financing and capital in just a second, but let me get Ms. Kamdani into the conversation as well. You've heard what Feike as well as Bob Moritz have had to say. You know, you come from Indonesia. As we've been pointing out, it is countries like India, Indonesia, Africa that are facing the vulnerabilities, the challenges of what is happening to climate change at this point in time. Is this a matter that has political buy-in? Is there political will to try and see where you can access technology, where you can access capital to try and move down this road? What is the experience at this point in time?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to join this panel. I was excited yesterday hearing, the leaders was talking about climate change, and I think Vice President Al Gore was saying, political will is renewable resource, right? So the feeling that I get right now is when we talk about, we don't even have to talk about adaptation yet, talk about climate change in general. There's still a big gap between the developed countries and developing countries. And we have to address that gap, because when businesses come to picture, we cannot just look at the global businesses. We have to also talk about the local businesses. So first of all, I think what is adaptation? You were mentioning even the most advanced companies are still not clear. How about us? Where we're coming from? We're between. Mitigation is we're starting, but adaptation is still very far off, right? So what it is actually needs to be social. We need to educate. And what kind of program can we actually do? And when we talk about the who, right, it's government, yes, but where does each government stand also differ in their point, right? There are so many priorities of government. When we talk even about achieving net zero, of course they will commit themselves. Indonesia had committed to 2016 achieving net zero, but it's just a commitment, right? We know that has to be translated to companies on how they're going to achieve the net zero. So the work needs time. It is a process. And I just feel like we're running behind this time, right? And so that's, I think, bringing the actors. This is definitely a stakeholder engagement. We need to bring all actors in place. And this cannot be just government, business. It has to be all, the civil society. And lastly, also, when we talk about the how, yes, I agree, technology important. Yes, I agree, finance is very, very important. But we have, in our part of the world, have to look at the social components. So many of the effort that we're doing are hindered by the social aspect. So the intergenerational social aspect is very, very important, and we have to prioritize and put through this as well.
In the context of India, the how, have we been able to address that? In terms of being able to measure what needs to be done, how is the government looking at this issue at this point in time in terms of identifying outcomes, impact, and more importantly, what is the biggest challenge that you face when we talk about adaptation and the need for adaptation? Is financing the issue? Is technology the issue? Is will the issue? What are the deterrents?
Sure. As the G20 presidency is currently with India, just to remind ourselves that the overall theme is one Earth, one family, one future. And I think in an interconnected world, mitigation or adaptation, both are equally important. But we are coming out of COP27 and the sort of rebalancing of bringing adaptation back to the table, as was discussed, is very relevant for India. If you look at our NDCs, both mitigation and adaptation are equally balanced. What we are trying to do is we are trying to identify the most vulnerable areas. So where the cities, coastal areas, food and agriculture, infrastructure. So it's important to have a vulnerability